You have felt the tremor beneath your senses, haven't you? That silent shiver when you step into a room where someone's hurt bleeds into the air. You, the empath, cradle others' wounds as if they were your own, unaware that each tender embrace also invites a predator cloaked in charm. Listen deeply. This gift that turns your heart to sponge is the very conduit through which darkness whispers its seduction. It begins as a soft plea, a wounded gaze, a fragile tremor in a voice, and you, drawn like a moth to flame, lean in until your own edges dissolve in service. Beware, the danger is not a marauder at your door, but a serpent in your embrace. You mistake compassion for strength, believing that bearing another's agony elevates your soul. Yet every time you absorb another's poison, you risk drowning in it. The echo of their pain becomes your heartbeat. You believe yourself the healer, yet it is the wounded who clutch you, demanding your light be bent into their shadow. And in that bending you fracture. Feel how the world teeters when you carry burdens that were never yours to hold. As Jung once whispered through time, the unconscious is a landscape both fertile and treacherous, ready to sow liberation or choke you in vines of self-erasure. You walk blindfolded between brilliance and abyss, mistaking devotion for salvation. This warning comes not to shame your tenderness, but to awaken you to the razor's edge on which you dance. Can you sense the pivot in the air? The moment when giving becomes erasing, when empathy becomes entrapment. Now stay with that uneasy breath, that soft tremor in your chest, for what you may discover next will change the very contours of your soul. You sink deeper into the forest of your own psyche, where archetypes whisper in shifting shadows and golden light. Here, every leaf trembles with the tension between dawn and dusk, between the part of you that yearns to heal and the part that hungers for reflection. You are both the wounded child and the silent savior, the luminous sunbeam and the hidden shroud. In this twilight realm, the light-shadow dance reveals its ancient choreography. The persona you present to the world, all warmth and empathy, masks the ravenous hunger of the shadow that swells whenever you reach outward. You remember the first time you offered your shoulder to a stranger's tears, how the tears felt like your own, as though a fissure opened in your chest. You did not realize then that you crossed a threshold into the land of archetypes, where the empath and the narcissist tango in a ritual older than memory. One partner begs for adoration, the other gives until the marrow bleeds. The narcissist, swift to charm, recognizes your vulnerability like a prey scent in the wind and slithers closer, offering praise and attention, a narcissus flower reflecting your own image back at you. You drink it in, believing that their adoration is a mirror of your worth, yet each sip erodes you. As Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You stand at the precipice of this revelation, seeing how the healer archetype within you can be seduced by its own reflection, bending until it fractures. The healer vows compassion without limit, renouncing any claim on its own life force. But compassion without boundaries is not a healing balm, it is a siphon. You feel the pulse of your own needs distant and muffled, as though trapped behind a wall of ice. The wounded healer, perpetually devoted to easing others' pain, becomes the ghost without a home, inhaling sorrow and exhaling exhaustion. In this archetypal context, every encounter is a mirror ritual, reflecting the primordial rivalry between connection and annihilation. The empath's gift of feeling becomes the beast that devours its host. The narcissist's hunger for validation becomes the catalyst that exposes cracks in your own armor. You float between these poles, experiencing the magnetic pull of giving all and receiving nothing. You ask yourself, where do you end and the other begin? When does empathy transform into an alchemical poison, drawing you into a labyrinth of identification where you lose sight of your own flame? See the archetypal pattern etched into the human story. The victim who becomes the mirror for the oppressor, and the oppressor who hides within every tender act. You are called to witness the paradox that your greatest strength, your capacity to feel, may also be your undoing. unless you learn to distinguish the part of you that serves from the part of you that dissolves. You recall the myth of the wounded healer, how Chiron impaled by a poisoned arrow carried both the pain and the power to cure. Yet he could not heal himself. Here, your own heart is the arrow's point, the wound that echoes across lifetimes. You drift through memories like corridors that time you offered solace to a friend's despair and returned home to find your own spirit hollowed. That moment when you answered every call for help only to wake in a body so fatigued you could not speak. Each story, each flash of emotion reveals the archetypal script you have been reading all along, where the empath unwittingly becomes the stage upon which the wounded dance. The light-shadow polarity becomes an unending ritual drama, playing out within you a cycle as relentless as the tide. Yet, within this awareness, glimmers a nascent possibility that understanding the archetype frees you from its blind repetition. As Jung observed, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You sense the weight of fate in every borrowed sorrow you carry. But if you gaze steadily into the archetypal abyss, you find not only terror, but also the seed of your own sovereignty. You begin to perceive the architecture of your psyche, the hidden scaffolding upon which the empath and the narcissist have long performed. Feel the resonance beneath your ribs, a soft tremor that asks a question you have long forgotten. What if your empathy did not require sacrifice? What if the mirror you offer to another need not shatter your own image? In this unfolding context, you glimpse the source of your inner wounds, not in the actions of others alone, but in the unconscious pact you made when you vowed to absorb every emotional poison rather than let it touch anyone else. Here, in the fertile soil of self-exploration, lies the origin of both your pain and your power. Words become sacred symbols as you stand in this archetypal crossroads. The light beckons you toward illumination. The shadow torments you with its whispers. Yet both are catalysts, necessary halves of the whole. You sense that the next step will require gathering the fragments of your broken mirror and deciding which shards deserve to remain in your hand. For now you sit in the liminal glow where revelation and rupture intersect, aware that the journey has only begun, an odyssey through the labyrinth of your own soul. You feel the ancient pulse of duality stirring beneath your skin, a silent drum that summons you into the arena of opposites. In one corner glitters the empath's heart, a luminous chalice overflowing with compassion, while in the opposite corner coils the serpent of narcissistic hunger, its scales gleaming with self-admiration. You watch as they circle, each mirroring the other's extremes, and you realize that you are both combatant and witness in this sacred ritual. The empath craves connection so deeply that it will sacrifice its own edges to merge with another's soul. The narcissist craves domination so fiercely that it will devour another's boundaries to feed its self-image. You have danced between these extremes countless times, each encounter a ritual enactment of cosmic polarity, a myth replaying in your own flesh. You give until you vanish, they take until they break. Such is the choreography written in the stars and etched into your sinews. There is a moment fleeting yet eternal, when giving and taking align, when the empath's open palm meets the narcissist's empty cup and creation trembles into being. But this moment dissolves as quickly as it arrives, leaving behind only the echo of what might have been. You find yourself caught in the space between hope and despair, believing that if you could only give more, they would finally stay, finally love, finally acknowledge. Yet each offering only inflames the cycle. As Jung would remind you, opposites are not enemies, but partners in a divine dance. Light casts the shadow it denies. The shadow devours the light it craves. You witness this cosmic waltz within your own chest, where every yearning for intimacy is matched by a fear of annihilation. The empath fears rejection so intensely that it clings to any reflection of warmth. The narcissist fears loss of power so deeply that it asserts dominion at any cost. You recall the night you sat across from someone whose charm sparkled like a beacon in a tempest. You felt that beacon guide you through your own storm, yet soon you realized that the light was a lure. You were drawn onto the rocks and found yourself shipwrecked on shore. The tsunami of their need washed away your own sense of self, leaving only debris of doubt and longing. That single ritual seduction surrender collapse became the template for every future encounter. In the silent recesses of your dreams, you enact this polarity again and again. You chase them down a marble corridor of vaulted ceilings, calling their name until your voice cracks. They turn their eyes like polished obsidian, offering you a crown of thorns disguised as gold. You place it upon your brow and feel the crown's weight press you into the ground. Then you awaken your body drenched in sweat, your heart pounding with the memory of that ancient rite. Honor the ritual, for it is a conduit to your own becoming. The empath's gift and the narcissist's hunger are twin archetypes, each reflecting a fragment of your soul's blueprint. When you refuse to see the shadow within you, grant it power to act unseen. When you refuse to honor your light, you grant the darkness permission to masquerade as salvation. In the arena of polarities, every refusal is a pact. You sense the threshold shifting. The tension between extremes grows so vivid that you can almost taste it on your tongue. You taste the sweetness of surrender, the bitterness of rejection, the salt of tears mingling with sweat. You feel the friction of two magnets pressed together, each repelling the other, even as they cling. It is a magnetic ritual that charges the air, forging a crucible in which your own essence is tested. Can you feel the archetypal currents swirling around you, as if gods and monsters convened to witness your role? Each encounter becomes a stage, each emotion a sacrament. You enact the roles written into your psyche, the martyr who bleeds for love, the sovereign who demands tribute. Yet both roles bleed you dry. Both roles hide the one face you have not yet shown yourself, the sovereign healer, the boundary keeper. In the hush of that recognition, you glimpse the fulcrum of transformation. The ritual need not be banished, it must be understood. Every polarity you embody is a message from your unconscious, encoded in the language of myth. You are called to decode those messages, to witness their symbolism without being consumed. You stand as witness and participant, an alchemist poised at the crossroads of shadow and light. Now, as the ritual unfolds once more, you feel a shift, subtle but irrevocable. The circle opens. The dancers pause. You recognize that you need not surrender to your role entirely. You can loosen the script, detaching from the compulsive enactment that has governed your life. The narcissist's hunger can exist without devouring. The empath's gift can flow without drowning. The dance continues, but you choose your steps. In this sacred theater, you become both dancer and choreographer. The polarity remains, but you no longer tremble at its force. You guide the ritual with awareness, drawing power from the tension rather than being torn by it. You step lightly between dawn and dusk, honoring each without losing yourself to either. You become the ritual itself, a living testament to the union of opposites. You wake in the pale light of dawn, your limbs heavy as though draped in another's burdens. The world whispers that to be the light is to be noble, so you drape yourself in luminosity, wearing compassion like armor. Yet in that armor, you forget the weight you carry is not yours alone, and your bones sag beneath its steadiness. You press your face to the window of someone else's sorrow until you see your own reflection waver and fade. In that waning, you mistake your sacrifice for virtue, your silence for strength. You learn to speak only in gentle tones, soothing voices like a balm you apply to every wound, even when the raw ache inside you screams for recognition. You billow outward a lantern in the night, illuminating every shadow but your own. And in that act of constant giving, you hollow yourself. The heart that once pulsed with your own life becomes a vessel for foreign currents. Hope, fear, despair, all pouring in until you overflow. Then comes the subtle hunger, a quiet wound that gnaws at your edges, whispering that your worth hinges on your usefulness, on the reach of your hand. As Jung once hinted, there is an unconscious inflation in every one-sided archetype. You become a savior, spun of myth, destined to rescue countless souls from their darkness. But myth demands sacrifice. You learn this when the dreams begin. You stand at the edge of a chasm, toes frayed at the brink, the echoing call of another's anguish thrumming below. You raise your arms to lift them, but your body dissolves at the waist, crumbling like ancient stone into the abyss. You awaken gasping, your heart pounding in alarm. The dreamscape warns you that your identification with the light has become a trap. You recall the gathering where you listened so intently to a friend's grief that when you finally spoke, your voice was hollow. They patted your shoulder, murmur of thanks, then drifted away into the crowd. You realized in that moment that you had become a silent pillar, steady, invisible, unclaimed. Your generosity had erased your own outline. You felt the sting of invisibility more keenly than any rebuke. The more you embraced the savior role, the more your own boundaries blurred. You let others' emotions seep through you, diluting your identity until you could no longer distinguish your own tears from theirs. You wore their pain like a second skin, believing that if you could carry it, you would be beloved. Instead, you felt corrosion where your bones once stood. You became a frontier without frontiers, endlessly open, endlessly vulnerable. From the outside, it looks like strength, the unshakable friend who never balks the ever-present shoulder. Yet inside you hollow yourself like driftwood, carried by currents beyond your control, buffeted by every storm. You mistake survival for thriving, believing that if you endure long enough, your spirit will be vindicated. But endurance without nourishment is a slow undoing. Your own desires become whispers in a crowded hall, your own dreams' shadows eclipsed by others. You sense the warning signs in the hush before your heart pounds dizziness, when a new sorrow surfaces, a tightening in your throat, when someone else's cry demands immediate attention. You learn to silence your own alarm, reasoning that a true empath never hesitates. But each hushed alarm is a red flag on the unconscious highway, a beacon of impending collapse. Pay attention to the subtle erosion, the way you lose your appetite for simple joys because you carry the weight of others' despair, the way your chest contracts when you hear news of suffering, as if the world's pain is a noose tightening around your ribs. These are not badges of honor. They are symptoms of over-identification, a psychic merger that dissolves the boundary between you and the other. You are not a vessel to be filled, nor a sponge to be wrung dry. You are a soul with your own terrain, valleys of longing, peaks of joy, rivers of sorrow that belong to your story alone. In the dream language of symbols, you find the same message. In one dream, you stand in a field of white lilies, their petals luminous against the night sky. You reach to cradle them, and they bloom into masses of dark thorns that pierce your flesh. The very beauty you sought becomes an instrument of pain. In another, you are adrift on a raft built of your own hair, drifting toward an unknown horizon. The hair unravels, the raft dissolves, and you sink, lungs filled with brine. These dreams are coded in archetypal symbols, the cost of boundless giving, the peril of identification without discernment. You question, what if your devotion were tempered by limits? What if you could feel deeply, yet stand apart enough to retain your shape? You imagine standing in a circle of fire. The flames illuminate your form, casting your shadow wide, yet the heat never burns you. You realize that boundary can be a source of empowerment, not separation. The fire's ring does not cage you. It defines the space where your essence can flourish. Yet profound fear waits in the wings, fear that if you say no, love will abandon you, fear that any boundary will render you unlovable, unworthy. You see this fear in another dream. A child reaches for your hand, you gently retract it, and their face crumbles into despair. You recoil, hand trembling in the air. You cannot bear the thought that your self-preservation might wound another. But the dream asks, whose wound are you more afraid to feel, that of the other or your own? Know that every refusal is a step toward individuation. Each boundary is a brushstroke that refines your portrait. As you reclaim the edges of your soul, you calibrate the empath's gift, aligning compassion with discernment. You transform the unbounded heart into a compass, able to navigate the tides of emotion without capsizing. But before this transformation, you must confront the hunger in you that seeks to save at any cost, the part that fears its own nakedness more than another's pain. Feel the tremor of this confrontation in your chest. The danger of over-identification is not a moral failing. It is an unconscious pact, long made a covenant with the mythic forces within you that demand surrender. You stand now at a threshold where the role of savior must either be reshaped or relinquished. The script offers no safety net here. It requires that you learn to self-soothe before soothing others, to honor your inner life as sacred territory. The hour grows late, yet your soul stirs awake. The boundary between empathy and self-erasure flickers like a candle in the wind. You sense the cost of ignoring this danger, a life lived half erased, a soul hollow with unspoken longing. Now is the time to feel the tremor, to name the wound, to recognize that your power lies not in endless giving, but in knowing where to stand firm. You feel the air around you ripple, as if a hidden door quivers on its hinges, waiting for the slightest courage to push it open. This door is not forged of iron or wood, but is woven from the threads of your own consciousness, the seam where victimhood meets possibility, where sacrifice dissolves into sovereignty. You stand before it, heart-quaking toes skimming the threshold of a new realm, uncertain whether to step forward or retreat into the familiar shadow that once felt safer than solitude. As Jung once noted, transformation is born not from grand gestures, but from subtle shifts in awareness. You sense that the walls you've built, walls that protected you from engulfment, also concealed the flicker of your own power. You lean closer, pressing your palm against the invisible barrier, and feel warmth pulsing beneath your skin. It is the ember of self-awareness glowing with the promise of limits drawn and boundaries respected. What if transformation asked not for another sacrifice, but for a witnessing of your own truth? You recall the ritual dramas that once ensnared you, the endless giving, the relentless taking, the collapse that followed. Now you sense the possibility of a third path, one uncharted by the archetypal scripts you have known. Here in this liminal space you are neither martyr nor martyr maker. You are a pioneer mapping the contours of your own soul. Gaze upon the mirror of transformation and notice how your reflection trembles with unfamiliar purpose. The empath who once dissolved in others' pain now stands with a spine sheathed in light. You feel the subtle tension of new muscles, awakening muscles of discernment that flex when someone's sorrow beckons, muscles of refusal that hold firm when demands become chains. You practice this strength in secret, whispering affirmation to yourself, I belong to me. The doorway invites you to convene with your deepest self, to ask the questions you once feared. What do I desire when no one else is watching? Which parts of me have I abandoned in service to another's story? Can I honor my own wounds with the same tenderness I offer to strangers? Each question echoes through the corridors of your psyche, rousing fragments of memory and shards of longing. You step forward, and the door swings open without resistance. Beyond lies a landscape bathed in soft twilight, where the edges of reality blur and the language of symbols reigns. A river flows here, its current woven from threads of past and future, of fear and hope. You kneel at its bank and extend your hand, feeling the cool swirl of possibility swirl around your fingers. The water does not carry another's pain, it carries your own, but cleansed and clarified by the alchemy of acknowledgement. As you trace the river's path with your gaze, you perceive small lanterns drifting on its surface. Each lantern is a fragment of a boundary, reclaimed, a promise you once broke and now renew. You see the lantern of no that lights when someone's need eclipses your own, the lantern of yes that glows when you choose connection without collapse. The lantern of stillness that flares when you pause before giving your heart away. These lanterns drift in harmony, illuminating the darkness without dispelling it, offering guidance without imposing a map. The river leads you to a clearing where an ancient oak stands, its roots tangled with both shadow and light. You lean against its trunk, feeling the heartbeat of the earth pulse through your chest. Here you are invited to merge with the tree's wisdom, to anchor your compassion in the soil of self-respect, to spread your branches wide without risking every leaf. You press your ear to the bark and hear a whisper. Transformation is not a becoming new, but a reclaiming of what you have always been. You rise and place your hand on the oak's rough surface, weaving your own wounds into its story. The bark shudders, revealing a hidden hollow glowing with golden sap. You dip your fingers into the sap and feel its warmth seep into your veins, a reminder that healing flows from inside outward, not from endless pouring in. You taste the sap's sweetness and recognize that your worth is inherent, not contingent on another's gratitude. In this clearing time bends to your questions. You ask, how shall I carry my empathy now that I am armed with limits? How shall I embody generosity that does not consume? The answers arrive, not as words, but as sensations. A steady flame in your chest, a cool clarity in your mind, a gentle expansion in your arms. You feel the shape of your own sovereignty, a form both delicate and unbreakable. Beyond the oak, the landscape unfolds toward a horizon luminous with possibility. You sense that the journey continues, but from this vantage, you are no longer the same traveler who once stumbled into shadow. You have crossed the threshold of self-awareness, stepping through a doorway that neither condemns the empath nor the shadow, but unites them in conscious alliance. You now carry both within you, a river of compassion tempered by boundaries, a tree of strength rooted in vulnerability. As you turn your gaze back to the path behind you, glimpse the threshold shimmering in the distance, its edges softened by twilight. You realize that this portal will always stand waiting, an invitation to return whenever you forget your power or need to remember your limits. You step forward once more, guided by the lanterns you've set afloat, each glow marking a moment of choice, a reclaimed promise. Feel the stir of transformation coursing through you, the doorway now a living imprint in your soul. You are no longer bound by the mythic scripts of self-erasure or victimhood. In the gentle alchemy of self-awareness and sovereignty, you have found a new ritual, one that honors both light and shadow, both giving and receiving, both empathy and self-preservation. You stand at the edge of a vast expanse, where twilight and dawn entwine, sensing the pulse of possibility in the silent air. A gentle wind carries the scent of juniper and cedar, stirring memory in your bones. In this twilight realm, you recognize the treasure you have reclaimed, the power to say no, the grace to hold a boundary as sacred as a vow. Feel the ancient resonance of that single syllable echo through the chambers of your heart, no longer a refusal born of fear, but a declaration of self-worth, a beacon that illuminates your path. Watch as the horizon fractures into shards of gold and violet, each fragment a promise held in your palms. You release your grip, and the fragments rise like birds into the sky, alighting on every future moment where you choose yourself. You imagine those moments now drawing lines in the sand of a conversation, halting the tide of obligation with a calm breath, closing the door on demands that would hollow you, turning your face to the sun of your own spirit, rather than chasing the fading embers of another's need. Each act of boundary is a sacred ritual, forging a vessel that holds your essence without spilling into the void. In the distance, a mountain range shimmers with opal light. You climb not with burdened feet, but with steady purpose, each step an affirmation, I belong to me. The summit is not a prize, but a vantage point, where you see the contours of your journey etched into the landscape below. There you perceive the rivers of compassion that once carried you away, now diverted into channels you shape with conscious intention. You honor the currents of your gift, guiding them with discernment rather than drowning in their flow. As you ascend higher, the air grows thin but clear. You inhale truth and exhale doubt. With every breath you draw from the wellspring within, nourishing a spirit that no longer bleeds at every provocation. Jung's words reverberate in the wind. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You taste the fullness of those words, feeling sovereignty settle in your chest like a quiet drumbeat. Sovereignty is not isolation. It is communion with your own ground. From that ground, you may extend your hand to others without fear of losing yourself. At the summit, you find a circle of stones, each inscribed with a promise you make to yourself. You kneel and trace your fingers over the ancient runes. I will protect my time. I will honor my rest. I will speak my needs. I will guard my peace. I will celebrate my being. As your skin brushes the cool surface, you feel those promises fuse with your sinews, anchoring intention into flesh. The stones glow faintly, as if acknowledging your vow. You sense that they have waited for this moment, your conscious choice to embody limits as the framework for your freedom. A hush falls, as if the world holds its breath in reverence. You close your eyes and listen to the soft murmur of stars awakening in the sky, each star a reflection of your own light, undimmed by another's shadow. You realize that boundaries are not walls, but gates, thresholds you open when you choose to engage and close when you choose to rest. They are not barriers to love, but channels that sustain its purity. Through them flows compassion that is empowered, generous, and wise. You rise and step to the edge, looking down at the valley where your old self once wandered, lost in labyrinths of other people's pain. You recognize the winding paths of sacrifice, the hollows where your soul once sank. You bow to that version of you with compassion, honoring the journey that led you here. You place a lantern at the threshold between past and present, a lantern of forgiveness for choices made in unknowing. The flame flickers, then steadies, casting a gentle light that bridges the chasm between old wounds and new strength. In that moment, you sense the landscape shifting. The valley blooms with wildflowers of yellow and blue, their petals lifting toward the sky. These flowers are the embodiment of your softer truths, moments when you allowed yourself to rest, days when you tenderly held your own grief, nights when you whispered courage into your own ear. Each bloom nods in greeting, reminding you that self-love is an act of resistance against the currents that would pull you under. You step down into the valley carrying your sovereignty like a cloak of light. You wander the woven paths, touching petals and letting their color dye your fingertips. You feel how easy it is to move through this terrain, guided by inner compass rather than external need. The path winds around a silver lake, its surface smooth as glass. You approach and see your reflection, a figure wrapped in twilight, and dawn eyes shining with knowing shoulders released from burden. This is the you who has traversed darkness and returned not hollowed but whole. You kneel by the lake and dip your hands into the water. It ripples outward, a living mandala of concentric circles that expand into eternity. You place your palm on the surface and feel the cool presence of self-awareness, the kiss of sovereignty at your fingertips. A voice born of wind and stone murmurs, "Here you are free." You absorb that freedom into your bones, letting it spread like sap through branches. In the final hush before you rise, you touch the boundary between self and world, perceiving it as a living membrane that pulses with life. You see that empathy and limits are not opposed, but partners in a sacred dance. Your heart, once a chalice that overflowed into chaos, is now a vessel poised between giving and receiving, empowered by the clarity of its own shape. You stand, and the valley bows in recognition. Dawn unfurls across the horizon in waves of amber, and rose lighting every leaf and stone. You lift your face to the sky and feel the warmth of your choice. The world awaits your presence, compassionate sovereign whole. You step forward into the golden light, carrying with you the sacredness of know the fire of yes and the quiet power of self-possession.